Hey everyone, welcome back. Today, we're going to talk about three really upsetting cases that show just how dangerous, unhealthy relationships and obsession can be. These stories, Ali Koschel, Bianca Devins, and Jennifer Dullos, are tough to hear, but they're important. They show what can happen when someone can't handle rejection or when they try to control others. We'll break down what happened in each case, the red flags that were missed, and how we can all learn to stop things like this from happening. Let's get into it. Ali Koschel was a 21-year-old student at the University of Mississippi, a place many people call Old Mississippi. She was full of life, working hard at school, and had a big future ahead of her. But in July 2019, Ali's story took a tragic turn. She was murdered in a senseless and shocking act that would forever change the lives of everyone who knew her. Now, this case is one that made headlines, not just because of the brutality of the crime, but because of the disturbing circumstances leading up to it. In this video, we're going to take a deeper look into Ali's life, the events that led up to her death, and how the investigation unfolded. This one is tough, but it's important. So, let's get into it. Let's begin with Ali herself. She was originally from Memphis, Tennessee, and had moved to Oxford, Mississippi, to study at the University of Mississippi. Ali wasn't just another college student. She was smart, ambitious, and loved by her friends. She had a vibrant personality and a bright future ahead of her. She was a marketing major and had a passion for business. Friends described her as someone who lit up every room she entered, with a heart full of kindness and an infectious smile. But, as we all know, sometimes life can take unexpected turns, and not everything is as it seems. Behind that smile, Ali was dealing with a complicated and, at times, unhealthy relationship. Ali had been seeing a fellow student named Brandon Thiesfeld. Now, Brandon wasn't just a random guy. He was someone Ali had been involved with for some time, but the relationship had its ups and downs. Brandon was described by people who knew him as charming at first, but over time, Ali started to notice some red flags. Friends later recalled that Ali had confided in them about the controlling and jealous behavior that Brandon showed. It's important to remember that toxic relationships don't always show their ugly side right away. In the beginning, everything can seem fine, but over time, the warning signs start to appear. Ali had noticed Brandon becoming more possessive, demanding more of her attention, and making her feel guilty when she spent time with others. The behavior grew more intense, and Ali became unhappy with how things were going. Despite this, she was still trying to figure things out. Relationships are complicated, and sometimes it's hard to let go of someone who you care about, even when you see the bad behavior. Ali, like many people in unhealthy relationships, didn't want to give up. But at the same time, she was trying to make sense of the situation. Now, the day Ali went missing, it started out like any other day. She had plans to meet up with a friend. But after not hearing from her for a couple of days, alarm bells started ringing. People who knew Ali knew something was off, and they were worried. Ali was not the kind of person to just disappear. When a friend couldn't reach her, they immediately called the police to report her missing. The search began almost immediately, and soon enough, police were combing through the area around the University of Mississippi, hoping to find a clue as to where Ali could be. Days went by, but nothing turned up. It wasn't until July 24th, 2019, just a few days after she went missing, that the police found the unthinkable: Ali's body. Ali's body was discovered near Sardis Lake, about 30 miles north of Oxford, in a remote area, not far from where she had been attending school. The location was secluded, and Ali's body had been hidden in a way that made it clear that this was no random crime. It was a deliberate act. She had been shot multiple times. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision. Whoever did this had planned it. It was clear from the beginning that this was a homicide. But the question on everyone's mind was, who did this, and why? As soon as the body was discovered, investigators began looking at everyone close to Ali. They started questioning people who knew her. And that's when they started turning their attention to Brandon Thiesfeld. And here's where things take a strange and eerie turn. Brandon was the last person seen with Ollie. In fact, on the day of her disappearance, Brandon had been the one to pick her up. They had gone out. But what exactly happened next was not clear to anyone at the time. But soon, police started piecing the puzzle together, and the story that emerged was chilling. As the investigation progressed, police began to focus more and more on Brandon. They learned that, earlier that week, he and Ollie had gotten into an argument. Ollie had told friends that things were not going well between them. There was jealousy, there was control, and there was tension. Things had gotten so bad that Ollie had even considered breaking up with him. But that didn't sit well with Brandon. His jealousy had been growing, and when he found out that Ollie was thinking about ending things for good, something inside him snapped. In his mind, he could not accept the idea of losing her, and that's when he decided to take drastic measures. Now, we know that Brandon and Ollie met that day, and things seemed normal. But once they were in a secluded area by the lake, Brandon made his move. He shot Ollie multiple times. This wasn't an accidental shooting. No, Brandon had planned it. He had the intention to kill her, and he went through with it. What's truly disturbing about this crime is that it wasn't some moment of uncontrollable rage or a crime of passion. No, this was premeditated. Brandon was in control. He had decided that the only way to solve his problem was to take Ollie's life. After the murder, Brandon tried to cover his tracks. He discarded his clothes, his gun, and all the evidence that might have linked him to the crime. But what he didn't realize is that the police were closing in on him. They started asking questions, and Brandon's story didn't add up. He was caught in his lies, and eventually, he confessed. Brandon admitted to everything. He admitted that he had planned to kill Ollie because of his jealousy and anger over their relationship. He said that when she tried to end things, he couldn't deal with it. He couldn't bear the thought of losing her, so he decided to take her life instead. It's impossible to understand what goes through someone's mind when they make the choice to take another life. But what we do know is that Brandon Thiesfeld's actions were completely unjustifiable. No one, no matter how angry, should ever think that murder is the answer to their problems. As the case went to trial, the community was left to pick up the pieces of the tragedy. Ollie's family, her friends, her classmates, they were all heartbroken. They had lost someone who meant the world to them, and nothing could change that. No matter what happens to Brandon in court, it will never bring Ollie back, but at least justice would be served. And this is the tough part. A story like Ollie's is a reminder of just how dangerous, unhealthy relationships can be. It's not just the big red flags that we need to watch for, but the small signs too. Jealousy, controlling behavior, and emotional manipulation can all be warning signs that something is wrong. If you or someone you know is in a relationship that feels off, don't ignore it. Trust your gut. If there's one thing we should all learn from Ollie's story, it's that we really need to do better for each other. We need to pay closer attention to the warning signs when something's not right. Sometimes, we get so caught up in our own lives that we miss the signs of someone who might be struggling. Ollie's story is a painful reminder that we can't ignore those signs. If you're in a relationship that doesn't feel right, if someone is controlling you, making you feel uncomfortable, or acting in ways that don't sit well with you, don't ignore it. Trust your feelings and reach out for help. It's okay to ask for help. And it's okay to walk away from something that's not healthy for you. And if you know someone who's going through a tough time, or if they seem off, check in on them. A simple message or a phone call could mean the world to someone. Ollie's life was taken far too soon, and her story should remind us that we need to be there for each other, especially when things don't seem right. It might not always be easy to spot the signs, but we have to try. Together, we can make sure no one feels like they have to suffer in silence. Let's talk about a story that is both heartbreaking and deeply disturbing. It's about Bianca Devins, a young woman whose life was stolen in a way that nobody should ever have to imagine. Bianca was just 17 years old, full of life, with dreams and aspirations ahead of her. Like many teenagers, she was active on social media, sharing pieces of her life with her followers, but her story ended in the most unimaginable way. This is the story of Bianca Devins, and why it's crucial for us to understand the lessons it teaches. Bianca Devins lived in Utica, New York, a city in Oneida County in the central part of the state. She was known for being friendly, creative, and passionate about her interests. Bianca loved music, photography, and anime, with a special interest in the Japanese visual culture and aesthetics. Her social media accounts, especially on Instagram, were a reflection of that, a place where she expressed herself, shared her thoughts, and connected with others who shared her passions. Bianca was just like any other teenager, navigating the ups and downs of life. But behind the posts, likes, and comments, Bianca was facing struggles that weren't visible to most people. Bianca's life was tragically cut short on July 14th, 2019. In Utica, New York, she was killed by Brandon Clark, a man she had known for a short time. Brandon Clark was 21 years old, and although they had spent time together, Bianca had made it clear that she wasn't interested in continuing the relationship. Unfortunately, Brandon couldn't handle that rejection. He had become obsessed with Bianca, and when she told him she wanted to end things, he couldn't accept it. So, he lured her to a remote area in a forested location in the town of Clay, outside Syracuse, New York, under the pretense of hanging out. What happened next was horrifying and impossible to understand. Brandon took Bianca's life in cold blood, stabbing her multiple times. He then proceeded to take photos of her body, and in an appalling act, shared these images online. To make matters even worse, he filmed parts of the attack and uploaded them to the internet. The images quickly spread across various platforms, and in the most vile way. It became a moment in time that can never be erased. Now, you might be wondering, how could something like this happen? Bianca was just a teenager, living her life and trying to figure things out. Like all of us, this situation reminds us how dangerous toxic relationships can be. Bianca had tried to push Brandon away, but his obsession with her made it nearly impossible for her to escape. The things she went through, the emotional manipulation, the control, the constant pressure, were signs of a relationship gone wrong. But sometimes, when you're in that situation, it's hard to know how to get out, especially when someone refuses to take no for an answer. It's easy to look at a story like this and feel helpless. It's hard to understand how something so horrific could happen, but it's also a wake-up call. We need to recognize the signs of unhealthy relationships before it's too late. This isn't just about Bianca. It's about all of us. Every single one of us should be able to feel safe in our relationships, whether online or offline. Rejection should never lead to violence, and no one should ever feel afraid to speak up about their feelings. The biggest thing we can learn from Bianca's story is how important it is to pay attention, both to our own relationships and the relationships of people around us. It's easy to ignore when someone seems unhappy or when things seem off, but it's so crucial to step in, to check in, to ask how people are doing. Sometimes, the smallest act of kindness, the smallest conversation, can make a difference. Bianca's death wasn't just a result of one person's actions. It was also a product of a bigger issue, the way people sometimes treat each other online. Social media, while it can be a tool for connection, can also be a place where the boundaries between what's private and what's public get blurred. Bianca was active on Instagram, where she posted pictures of herself, just like so many of us do. Unfortunately, that's where the nightmare took an even darker turn. After Bianca was murdered on July 14th, 2019, Brandon Clark posted the photos he took of her body to Instagram, and these images quickly spread across the platform. Even more chilling, he shared a video of the crime. The internet became an unsafe space, not just for Bianca's family and friends, but for anyone who saw those posts. The photos were shared, liked, and commented on as if they were just another post in a news feed. But for Bianca's loved ones, for anyone who cared about her, this wasn't just a picture. It was a painful, cruel violation of her privacy and her dignity. What's even more disturbing is the way these images and videos spread. Social media has the power to connect us, but when people don't understand the weight of their actions, that same platform can turn into something dangerous. It's important to recognize that what happens online isn't just online. It has real-world consequences. Bianca's photos, shared without her consent, became part of a bigger problem: the lack of control we have over our lives and images once they are posted. Once something is online, it's incredibly difficult to take it back. Bianca's family and friends had to deal with more than just the loss of her life. They had to deal with the public nature of her murder. The internet didn't just spread the images. It made the grief worse by turning Bianca's death into something people could look at, talk about, and comment on. This is where we, as a society, need to do better. We also need to talk about boundaries and respect. Bianca clearly told Brandon that she didn't want to continue the relationship, and yet, he couldn't respect that. This is a huge problem, and it's not just something that affects Bianca's case. It's something that happens in so many relationships. Rejection, boundaries, and personal space are basic aspects of any healthy relationship. Bianca's story shows us the horrible consequences of ignoring these boundaries. We need to ask ourselves, what happens when someone doesn't respect those boundaries? What happens when rejection is not accepted with grace, but with violence? This is the kind of question that should be at the forefront of every conversation about unhealthy relationships. No one should ever feel threatened or unsafe when they try to walk away from a relationship. But it's not just about relationships. Bianca's case also brings up a bigger conversation about safety, both online and in the real world. We need to find ways to protect people from online harassment and ensure that social media platforms are held accountable for what is shared. These platforms need to make sure that harmful content, especially violent or graphic images, is removed immediately and that people who engage in this kind of behavior are held responsible. It's not enough to just report content. There needs to be a larger focus on making sure these platforms are safe for everyone. It's clear that Bianca's story is one that should never be forgotten. She was a young woman with so much ahead of her. Her life was taken by someone who couldn't accept rejection, and her death was amplified by the power of social media. This case calls for change, not just in how we approach online content, but in how we handle relationships, how we teach respect, and how we look out for each other. So, what can we do now? How can we make sure that Bianca's story doesn't just fade away? First, we need to have conversations about relationships, real and online. We need to talk about the signs of unhealthy relationships and encourage people to speak out when something feels wrong. We need to show support for those who might be struggling, and we need to make it clear that no one should ever have to fear violence because they choose to end a relationship. We also have to really think about how social media fits into our lives. At its best, it's a way for us to connect, share ideas, and form communities. But at its worst, it can be a tool for harm, spreading hatred, cruelty, and even violence. When we look at Bianca's case, we see how social media, which should have been a place of connection, became a platform for abuse and exploitation. It's not enough to just say we need to change things. We need action. Platforms should take responsibility for protecting users from being targeted or hurt in any way. And it's not just about taking down harmful content after it's been shared. It's about preventing it in the first place, setting up systems that can detect and stop dangerous behavior before it escalates. Social media can be a great tool when used correctly, but when it becomes a place where people can hide behind screens to attack others, it loses its purpose. It's important that we hold these platforms accountable, making sure they are spaces that promote kindness, understanding, and respect instead of abuse, exploitation, or worse. We need to ask ourselves, how can we better protect the most vulnerable, especially young people who are still learning about the world and their place in it? We have to find ways to create safer spaces online where people feel comfortable, not afraid. And beyond that, we need to look at how we can be more present in each other's lives, especially when someone seems like they're struggling. We can't just be bystanders to each other's pain. When we see someone isolated or hurt, whether in person or online, we need to step up. We need to be the ones who reach out, offer help, and let others know they're not alone. Bianca didn't deserve what happened to her. And the best way we can honor her memory is by ensuring that no one else feels isolated or unsafe, whether they're scrolling through their phone or walking down the street. We should all strive for a world where people don't have to feel like they have to face challenges on their own, where the simple act of kindness, Whether it's a text, a phone call, or an in-person check-in, makes all the difference. Bianca's story is a painful reminder of how quickly things can go wrong when someone feels powerless, unloved, or unheard. But we can choose to make sure that others feel seen, supported, and respected, always. Let's take what we've learned from Bianca's story to heart. Let's rethink how we engage with others online, how we handle relationships, and how we show respect to everyone around us. But most importantly, let's make it our goal to be there for one another. We all deserve to feel safe, valued, and heard. And if we do that, if we take action to support and protect each other, then we can start making the world a safer and kinder place for everyone. The murder of Jennifer Dullos is a heartbreaking and disturbing story that no one should ever have to experience. Jennifer, a loving mother of 5, had her life stolen from her, and her family will never be the same. Jennifer's life wasn't just taken. It was destroyed by someone who couldn't accept that she wanted to leave a relationship that was no longer healthy for her. This case isn't just about Jennifer. It's about everything she went through, everything she did to try to protect herself, and everything we need to learn from what happened to her. Jennifer Dullos was a 50-year-old mother living in New Canaan, Connecticut, when her life was tragically cut short. Her story is about escape. She tried to break free from a relationship that no longer worked. She was married to Fotis Dullos, a wealthy businessman, and what seemed like a normal marriage for a while eventually became something much darker. Over time, Fotis began to show controlling and obsessive behavior, and Jennifer's only option was to get away. She filed for divorce on June 20th, 2017, hoping to give her children a safer, more peaceful life. But the man she had been married to wasn't ready to let go. He couldn't handle the idea that Jennifer was moving on without him. He couldn't accept that she wanted a future that didn't include him. His obsession turned into something dangerous and deadly. Jennifer was a mother, and above all else, she cared about her children. Her decision to leave Fotis wasn't about rejecting him. It was about protecting them, giving them a life without fear. Jennifer did what so many people in abusive relationships try to do. She left. But leaving isn't always enough. Jennifer filed for divorce, took steps to protect herself legally, and even tried to get a restraining order on July 24th, 2017. But as we see in so many situations, leaving doesn't always mean you're free from danger. Sometimes, leaving only makes the situation worse. In Jennifer's case, it meant that Fotis became even more desperate to control her. He couldn't handle the idea of losing control, and he took things too far. Jennifer's case also sheds light on how difficult it could be to get out of an abusive relationship, especially when the other person is willing to go to any lengths to hold on. Jennifer made every effort to protect herself and her children. She took the necessary steps to make sure she was safe. But in the end, it wasn't enough. We need to understand that it's not always just about leaving. It's about making sure that the systems around victims of domestic violence are strong enough to keep them safe. Legal protections, support from law enforcement, and access to resources are all crucial. But they don't always guarantee safety, and that's something we need to address. One of the most important lessons from Jennifer's story is that the emotional scars of an abusive relationship are just as real and dangerous as physical harm. Jennifer endured emotional and psychological abuse for years. She wasn't just facing a person who was physically violent. She was facing someone who tried to control every part of her life. Someone who didn't want to let go even after their marriage ended. Emotional abuse can take many forms, from controlling behavior to constant criticism, gaslighting, and making the victim feel like they have no power. All of these things can be just as damaging as physical abuse. It's important for us to understand that emotional and psychological abuse is real, and it can leave deep, lasting wounds that are hard to see, but just as painful. Jennifer's murder didn't happen in a vacuum. It wasn't just a random act of violence. It was the end result of a long period of control, manipulation, and desperation from someone who couldn't handle rejection. On May 24th, 2019, Jennifer was last seen dropping her children off at school. Later that day, She was reported missing. It's a painful reminder that sometimes, even when someone does everything right, they leave, they get the protection they need, the danger can still be there. We need to ask ourselves, how do we ensure that victims of domestic violence are safe during the most vulnerable times in their lives? When they're trying to escape, how do we make sure that when someone seeks help, they aren't just given a piece of paper, but real, meaningful protection? We also have to take a look at how we treat domestic violence as a whole. Too often, people think that if someone isn't physically injured, then the situation isn't serious. But we know that abuse can take many forms. And just because there are no visible wounds doesn't mean that the person isn't being harmed. The system needs to do a better job of supporting victims of all kinds of abuse, not just the physical kind. Domestic violence needs to be treated as a serious, ongoing threat, and we need to give the people who are in these situations the tools they need to get out safely. It's easy to say that Jennifer should have done this or that, but the reality is that leaving an abusive relationship is one of the hardest things anyone can do. The emotional and psychological hold that an abuser can have over their victim is powerful. People like Jennifer have so many things to worry about: their children, their safety, their future. It's not just about escaping from the abuser. It's about figuring out how to survive once they leave. And that's a question we all need to think about. How can we help people who are in these situations? How can we support them in ways that make them feel safe and empowered to escape without fear of retaliation? The effects of Jennifer's murder are far-reaching. Her children are left without a mother, and they'll have to grow up with the loss of the person who loved them most. This isn't just about the immediate pain of losing a loved one. It's about the long-term impact on a family that will never be the same. Those children will carry this grief with them for the rest of their lives, and they'll always wonder how things could have been different. The trauma caused by losing a parent, especially in such a violent and heartbreaking way, is something that stays with people forever. We have to consider the ripple effect of domestic violence on children and families. It's not just the victim who suffers, it's everyone connected to them. Jennifer's case highlights the fact that the danger doesn't go away when someone leaves. We need to have a stronger, more responsive system that supports people during the most dangerous times, when they're trying to break free from a toxic and controlling situation. We need to make sure that those people are protected and that their abusers can't follow them, harm them, or destroy their lives. Ultimately, Jennifer's story is a wake-up call. It reminds us that domestic violence is not just something that happens behind closed doors. It affects everyone. It affects families, communities, and society as a whole. We need to do better. We need to protect those who are most vulnerable. We need to make sure that people who are trying to escape abusive situations have the support they need. And we need to ensure that no one else has to suffer the way Jennifer did. Jennifer's story is a powerful reminder of the real and devastating effects of domestic violence. And it serves as an urgent call to action. We can't afford to wait for another situation like this to unfold. We need to take steps right now to change how we support those in abusive relationships and work towards preventing further harm. There are so many people out there feeling trapped in unsafe environments, unsure of how to break free. They are in pain, struggling to find a way out, but fear and uncertainty hold them back. For too long, society has allowed this cycle of violence to continue, with too little being done to protect those who need help the most. We need to start acting, not just talking. We need to create a world where no one feels like they have to endure abuse in silence or live in constant fear of their abuser. We should be focused on ensuring that people who want to leave these relationships can do so without the fear of retaliation. Our communities, our laws, and our systems must be better equipped to provide real, tangible protection for those at risk. We need stronger legal protections, more accessible support systems, and a culture that not only listens to but takes immediate action when someone reaches out for help. We need to work together to make sure that no one feels isolated or like they have nowhere to turn. Every person deserves to feel safe, whether they are in their own home or just walking down the street. It's time to make sure that people don't have to live in fear, hiding behind closed doors, worrying about the next time they will be hurt. Creating change means understanding that this is not just one person's problem. It affects families, communities, and society as a whole. It's not enough to hope for change. We have to actively pursue it. We need to ensure that every person, especially the most vulnerable, has the support they need to escape abuse and start a new life, free from violence. By coming together to fight for those who feel trapped, we can help create a world where people aren't afraid to leave unhealthy relationships. We can help build stronger, safer communities where families aren't torn apart by violence, and where everyone has the chance to live a life free from fear. Now is the time to act, before another life is lost, before another family is devastated. We all have a role to play in making this change happen, and it starts with each of us recognizing the urgency of this issue. The cases of Ali Koschel, Bianca Devins, and Jennifer Dullos remind us how important it is to spot unhealthy behavior and know when relationships are crossing a dangerous line. Obsession and control can have serious consequences, not just for the person involved, but for everyone around them. These stories show that we need better awareness and stronger support systems to help people before things go too far. Let's learn from these situations. Keep an eye out for warning signs, and make sure no one feels unsafe in their relationships. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more.